Okay, we're recording now. And so if you both could introduce yourselves and say a little bit about your background and why you're on this panel. Amy, why don't we start with you?
Okay, hi, I'm Amy Black. I'm representing the League of Women Voters. I'm currently the secretary of the League and heading up the Redistricting Committee to help bring awareness to the problem we just saw and educate and hopefully try to affect some change here in the state of Indiana.
Okay. And Leigh, if you could say a little bit about yourself.
I'm Leigh Morris. I'm the former mayor of LaPorte. I was CEO of LaPorte Hospital for over 2 decades as well. Been very actively involved in the political process for quite some time, and most interested in doing all I can to help assure that there is not only access to voting, but that there is trust in the elections process. And at the moment, the redistricting is almost at the top of my list, because unless we have fair and equitable redistricting, we are going to be denying people proper representation. I thought this film tonight, by the way, was fantastic. There was so much there, and it was, regardless of your feeling about the elections process, I believe that was a reassuring documentary. And I believe we should take it very seriously and really use it as a means of helping to assure others that the elections process is working in our country. That these comments about widespread fraud and that you shouldn't believe in the elections is totally wrong, and it's undermining the elections process. So I'm all in getting that record corrected.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you have questions at this time, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. Okay, here is a question for anybody. How can we confront disinformation in insular communities, especially about election integrity?
Well, I think number one, knowing what the process is, and number two, being involved, taking part in the elections process. I'm one who believes that in LaPorte County, we've taken a huge step forward with a very strong county board of elections and registration. It's made up of people that really want to assure that this process is working properly and that there is every opportunity for people to vote and to encourage people to vote here in LaPorte County. And they are very receptive to input from people. And they want to know what the questions and concerns are. And I believe they're devoted to trying to do something about those that need attention. We desperately need people to be engaged in the political process. Voting, running for office, encouraging good people to run for office, reporting concerns about the elections process if there are those. All of it is important. All of it is a way that every citizen can be involved in this process.
I think if I may as well, as far as, knowing if it's misinformation or, that the information you are getting and you are consuming is correct and valid, question your sources. We tend to get in a bubble, an echo chamber, if you will, of our news sources. We tend to only read, the flavor of your delight. If you like chocolate ice cream, you're going to eat chocolate ice cream all the time. If you like vanilla ice cream or strawberry ice cream, that's what you're going to go for all the time. So really balance your own news digest. Read what the other side might be saying. Read what your desired side might be saying. Read them all and practice discernment. You can really tell when something is absolutely outrageous, such as claims of election fraud. You can see if you really just kind of branch out and get other sources of information, you can see that truly is not true. And then help others in your community or your bubble of sphere of influence, social contacts, understand the truth as well. Be very leery of things that you read on social media where there is no fact checking. It's just whatever, someone feels like saying that day, it's often just a stream of consciousness. So just be very careful about your news digest. Make sure that you go to unbiased sources as well as, the other two biased sources, and then just sort of discern, and you'll be able to tell from the facts from the fiction.
Okay, so can you go over a little bit how redistricting currently works in Indiana?
Currently doesn't work. Leigh, I'll let you take that, because Leigh is a good member on the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission, which is a very important step toward getting fair redistricting going in Indiana.
Redistricting is done every 10 years after the U.S. Census is completed. And in Indiana, the Indiana General Assembly does the redistricting. Now, we've been trying, many of us have been trying for a long time to get an independent redistricting commission to do that, because what's been happening, whether Republicans are in office or Democrats are in office, when the redistricting is done, there is a tendency to want to make sure that that party stays in office. So they design the districts in such a way that it's safe for them, either to protect the incumbent who happens to live in that district, or to protect the party that wants to control. So as a result, in Indiana, we have supermajorities by one party, the Republican Party, in the Indiana General Assembly. And there might be some who say, well, Leigh Morris, you're a Republican, you should be in favor of that. I'm not. And I wouldn't be in favor of it if the Democrats were a supermajority in both houses. I think it denies people good representation. We have so many races that are not even contested. Nobody runs for that office because they have been what we call gerrymandered into a district that is safe for the other party. So why should a Democrat run, for example, in one of these districts that is designed to keep the Republican Party in office? So we've been unsuccessful in getting that independent redistricting commission. 14 states have that now, as a matter of fact. But what we are working on is the Indiana Citizens Independent Redistricting Commission is working to make sure that people know and understand what redistricting is, how it's done, what the issues are, what we need to be putting pressure on in order to improve the process in Indiana, and then have public opinion help the members of the Indiana General Assembly know that they can't just do it for their own benefit. It has to be done for the benefit of the voters in Indiana, rather than for the people who happen to be in office right now. So yes, the General Assembly will always probably actually approve the redistricting after the census, but it should be based upon solid information that assures that the districts are drawn in such a way to give the proper representation, fair and equitable representation, to the people in all of the legislative and congressional districts in Indiana. And that's our commission is going to be trying to make sure that is known. We have a map software program in place where all of us have the opportunity to actually work on how could we do that? How could we improve it? And we've got situations where people on one side of the street are in one senatorial district, and on the other side of the street they're in a different one. And we break up our communities in such a way that the community's voice is never heard. It's the political party's voice that's heard, not the community's voice that's heard. So those are some of the issues. Maybe that was more than anybody wanted to know, but I hope that was a little bit helpful.
Now, the census this year was delayed, so typically the redistricting would have been done by now, or pretty near done in the state of Indiana, but because the census had some issues, it was delayed, and so now I think they're coming out with that redistricting map in September, is it, Leigh, or October?
End of September is apparently the earliest we're going to see it. Which is going to mean that the legislature has very little time to get that done before we have to start working on the next round of elections.
Right. The good news with that, though, is we as citizens get to have input in terms of pressure, to write your state legislators, to write your state senator and ask them for fair redistricting. And the way they do redistricting now, it's fair, if you will, in terms of population numbers. But Leigh, have they ever considered redistricting based on population of registered voters to make sure you have an equal amount of Democrats and an equal amount of Republicans and an equal amount of independents in those districts, as opposed to just raw population data.
Well, that's one thing we haven't done very well in Indiana, and that there's several different criteria that can be used in doing the redistricting. One of them is making sure that you have a competitive district. Which means, for example, if you have 80%, or let's say 70% of the people who live in that district are in the Democrat party, are Democrats, let's put it that way. You don't try to draw that district in such a way that they're never going to be able to elect them. So a competitive district is one. A compact district is another. You don't want it drawn in a weird way so that it doesn't represent the communities involved. Contiguous, so that it matches up with other districts. Communities of interest. For example, take the Elkhart and the Grange County area. Heavy Amish population there. The Amish population has unique needs and interests that demand good representation. But if you draw it in such a way that they're not being represented in the General Assembly, that's a violation of what we call communities of interest. The agricultural communities are important communities of interest to make sure that they are protected and properly represented. So competitive, contiguous, compact, and respecting communities of interest are important ingredients that in Indiana have not really been respected very much.
Okay. We have a question in the chat. What sort of issues do independent grassroots campaigns face when running in gerrymandered districts?
I'd say in terms of competition, it'd be the same as probably most Democrats in the state of Indiana. The biggest probably thing they would need is support from their party, and you're not going to get that necessarily if you're in a district that the numbers are just so skewed that the state party might just say, gee, it's kind of like a lost cause. Let's go put money and support into areas where, we have a chance. So the biggest issues you're going to run up against would be, resources that you're going to get. And, the biggest thing you probably need to do is make sure that name recognition is there. If you're thinking about running, start running well before election time, get known, get involved, and be vocal.
This question also, I think, raises an issue that really deserves some consideration. 100 years ago, the two political parties were the dominant political forces. Today, that's less true. We have more independent voters. We have the Libertarian Party has become I believe, a contender in the elections process. And the way our redistricting is done in Indiana in particular, it's all within the two parties. Not the independents and third-party candidates and so on. So I think we need to take that into account as we're working on redistricting as well. That it isn't just Republicans and Democrats; it's the voters of Indiana that we make sure are properly represented. Jordan has some good questions.
Okay, so what legislation is currently in place to make gerrymandering harder in Indiana?
I think the short answer to that one is not much. The legislative structure in Indiana, I believe, encourages gerrymandering rather than discouraging it. We have very little criteria. Equalization of population, particularly in the congressional districts, and frankly, the legislature has done a good job in that regard. The 9 congressional districts are a very evenly balanced population. And they must be contiguous. They have to connect at all points. But beyond that, there's not much guidance at all in Indiana. Other states have adopted much more in the way of guidance to make sure that redistricting is done fairly and equitably.
What kind of other requirements have other states adopted?
Well, the competitiveness of a district. And we're holding public hearings right now, the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, and it's been amazing to me. We've asked them, what are the criteria that you think would make redistricting more fair and equitable in Indiana? And this issue of competitiveness is right at the top of the list for most of the people who've given their input. That you don't draw the district in such a way that the whole segment of the population is not represented. The district's ought to be representative of the population of the area that is represented. Considering the communities of interest so that you don't break up the Amish community, for example. You don't draw districts in such a way that minority groups do not have proper representation. And there's some unique needs of the minority groups that need to be respected. And like I look at LaPorte County, for example, why do we have LaPorte County divided as the way it is? We don't have a solid voice for LaPorte County as a community of interest. Part of us is in one congressional district, part of us in another. Drawn that way in order to protect the party in power, quite frankly. So,
and then you'll have districts that are drawn that include maybe 3 or 4 different counties, and that's very hard to represent because one county might not, be in agreement with the other county. So how do you represent that?
Exactly right, Amy.
So where can people see the current voting district maps for LaPorte County?
The League of Women Voters has those maps on the state website. So, Amy, the website for the state league?
Yes, it's. I'll put it into chat.
Yes.
I'll put the web address right here so you can see that. And then also on the local LaPorte County League website, I think that's right, you can see the map drawing software that Leigh and his group are struggling through right now. And I got to say, that's an awesome task. I looked at those maps and I was befuddled. I don't have nearly enough sharp pencils to figure that out. But if you want to take a hand at that, you can. That's also on the League of Women Voters site.
And you can also just Google Indiana Congressional Districts or Indiana Senatorial Districts, Indiana General Assembly Districts. So any of those options. But the League of Women Voters has done a great job, I think, of providing such information.
So we got about 7 minutes left. Do you think that gerrymandering has had a hand in political polarization like they mentioned in the movie?
Oh boy.
Go, Amy, go.
Oh yes. When you have one party, and it's like Leigh says, it doesn't matter which party it is. In Indiana, it happens to be the Republican Party. And I don't know if you paid attention, but maybe about 3 or 4 weeks ago, things got pretty raucous on the Indiana state floor in the state house. Some of I'm starting to call them now shock jock politicians. They just want to spout off and create controversy when there really shouldn't be any. The whole spirit of bipartisanship has really gone away, and that's a shame. And that's the effects of gerrymandering, because in gerrymandering, when that does occur, it's because one party wants to stay in power. And when you have a party that wants to stay in power, they're going to get vocal, they're going to spread misinformation, and they're going to just get ugly about it. And that's a real shame of what has become of democracy. And it's disheartening, but we can't get disheartened. We actually have to just get more engaged and get more active and more involved and let our voices be heard.
I think that letting our voices be heard is really important. The reason we've had some of that misconduct that Amy referred to in the General Assembly is because those in office think they can just get away with it and nobody will notice. Well, they need to know that we do notice, and they need to know that that is not conduct that's acceptable in the state of Indiana.
That's right. And it's not just reaching out to your lawmakers to voice your concerns, Reach out to influencers in your community. I know I've been writing to past clergy of past churches I belong to, said, hey, where do you stand on these issues? And are you making your voices heard? Reach out to fraternal groups, to just other organizations, and again, your friends and neighbors, because the more of our voices that get heard, the less they can discount us and the less of these shenanigans I think we'll see.
So can you talk a little bit about the town hall that's happening on March 20th? What is it? Why is it happening? Who's going to be there?
Right. I'll start it off and then let Leigh take over there. But the League of Women Voters, we're putting on this town hall. No registration is required. And the link for the town hall is in the chat. I sent that to everybody. And what we're going to do is talk about the power of redistricting in Indiana. And we've got a tremendous panel of experts, and Leigh is going to be our moderator of this because he's such a wonderful expert on the topic of redistricting, and he's so involved at the state level. So Leigh, you want to talk a little bit about some of the topics we'll be hitting on?
We're going to be looking at making sure people know how redistricting is done in Indiana, what the issues are, why is it important for citizen involvement to occur. We have specifically looked for panel members who will bring an independent perspective rather than just a particular political party. But we've also gotten a very young person on the panel. Elizabeth Benyon, who moderates the Politically Speaking program on WNIT Public Television, is a member of the panel. She'll give us a lot of the background of it. Helen Spezoleta, who is a professor of government at IU Northwest, is a panel member as well. And Pat Boy, who is a member of the General Assembly, will bring us perspective directly from the General Assembly. So we've got a series of questions, but we're also going to have opportunities for people from the public to raise the questions that they want to get answered. So I think there's going to be an interactive opportunity, and it's a great panel. I'm so pleased that we didn't have to ask more than once. They said, yes, we want to be involved. So super.
Great. And Amy, is that link to join, is that going to be on the Indiana League of Women Voters page, or is that going to be on the county one?
It's on the LaPorte County one. There's a link there. I think it's in the center of the page underneath, right by the mapping software. And then also, if you do go to the League of Women Voters LaPorte website, you can join our email list. We're sending out emails on this quite frequently as well. And also on our Facebook page.
Okay, great. We do have about a minute or two left. If there's any more questions that you guys want to ask, you can put it in the chat. Leigh and Amy, is there anything else that you want to add to this conversation?
I just want to thank you for making this available, because this is part of what we need to be doing to get the word out and educating people about the whole process here in the state of Indiana. So thank you.
I'd like to second that, Amy. And I think our LaPorte County Public Library and our libraries in La Crosse and Wanata and Westville and Michigan City are also supporting this effort. But LaPorte County Public Library is taking the lead on helping to get people well informed. And that's such an important ingredient in this process.
Oh, thank you. All right. If there's no more questions, I think we can wrap this up for tonight. There will be another screening of Line in the Street, which is another movie about gerrymandering, on Thursday, March 25th at 6 p.m. and it goes from 6 to 7. And there will be a Q&A with Leigh and Amy, and also Bob Millman, who is one of the creators of that film. So you can join on the library website at laportelibrary.org under events. All right. Well, good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating in our panel. Have a good night.
Bye now.